The fluorescent lights of the Zenith Industrial Corporation regional office buzzed with a low, oppressive hum, a sound that had been the backdrop to my professional life for the past 5 years. My name is Harold Vance. I am 48 years old. For 60 months, I poured my blood, sweat, and intellect into building the southwestern division of this company from a struggling branch into a cornerstone of Zenith's revenue. I sacrificed weekends, missed my daughter Lily's soccer games, and postponed vacations, all under the implicit promise of advancement. My dedication was quantifiable: a flawless record, 0 lost accounts, and a 40% increase in regional profits. But corporate loyalty, I was about to learn, is a hollow currency. The conference room smelled faintly of stale coffee and the unmistakable scent of sycophancy. At the head of the table stood Richard Caldwell, our regional vice president and my direct supervisor. Richard was 54, a man whose primary management skill was taking credit for the labor of his subordinates. Next to him stood his daughter, Chloe Caldwell, a 23-year-old recent graduate whose only qualification was the blood running through her veins. 3 months ago, Richard had brought her in as an operations specialist, a title created out of thin air. I was tasked with training her. I spent hours explaining supply chain logistics, vendor negotiations, and client retention strategies to someone who struggled to grasp the difference between a purchase order and an invoice. And now, Richard was grinning like a Cheshire cat, clapping his hands together. I am thrilled to announce that Chloe will be stepping into the role of Regional Operations Director, Richard declared, his voice booming across the room. The position I had been promised. The position I had essentially been performing without the title or the salary for the last 2 years. The room erupted in polite, obligatory applause. I clapped too. My hands moved mechanically, striking against each other, while my mind raced through the implications. Chloe smiled, a vacant, entitled expression that suggested she believed she had genuinely earned this moment. She held a pristine business degree, but in our world of heavy machinery components and just-in-time delivery systems, said academic theory was useless without practical experience. Richard caught my eye and offered a subtle nod, as if expecting my gratitude. Harold has been invaluable in getting Chloe up to speed, Richard added, twisting the knife. It was a masterclass in corporate humiliation. My 5 years of flawless performance, the late nights negotiating with suppliers in Houston and Phoenix, the meticulous streamlining of our delivery routes. It was all reduced to a training exercise for his offspring. When the meeting adjourned, I remained seated for a moment, letting the reality wash over me. The betrayal was not merely professional, it was deeply personal. Richard knew my situation. He knew about the alimony payments following my divorce, the impending college tuition for Lily, the mortgage on a house that felt too large and empty. He believed these financial obligations were chains that would bind me to the company, ensuring my silence and compliance. He thought I was a broken horse, too terrified of losing my steady paycheck to rebel. As I walked back to my desk, the office hummed with its usual chaotic energy. Phones rang, keyboards clattered, but I felt utterly detached from it all. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen, my mind crystalline with a sudden, liberating clarity. I realized that my fear of instability had made me complicit in my own exploitation. That ended today. I began to review the legal landscape of my employment. I had no non-compete clause, a crucial oversight by Zenith's HR department. But even if I did, California Business and Professions Code Section 16600 rendered such agreements largely void ab initio. Richard's blatant nepotism was more than just unethical. It brushed against a breach of fiduciary duty to the company's shareholders, prioritizing family over competent management. I spent the rest of the day meticulously documenting my accounts, not for Zenith but for myself. I knew the intimate details of every major client, their pain points, their delivery schedules, their idiosyncratic preferences. This knowledge was my true capital, and I was about to withdraw it in full. As the days passed, Richard's arrogance only amplified. He began to parade Chloe around the office, introducing her as the new visionary of the division. She sat in on my client calls, taking notes that were inevitably inaccurate, and asking questions that revealed a profound ignorance of our industry. During a negotiation with Apex Manufacturing, our largest client, Chloe interrupted, to suggest a pricing structure that would have resulted in a net loss for Zenith. I smoothly redirected the conversation, saving the deal, but the client's procurement manager, Sarah Jenkins, noted the incompetence. Harold, Sarah told me later in a private call, if that girl is taking over, we need to have a serious conversation about our future with Zenith. I assured her that changes were coming. The breaking point arrived precisely 1 week after the promotion announcement. Richard called me into his office, a smug smile plastered across his face. He wanted to discuss my transition into a supporting role for Chloe. He outlined a plan where I would handle all the complex logistics and client relations, while Chloe would focus on high-level strategy and attend executive meetings. In essence, I would do the work, and she would reap the rewards. I listened patiently, letting him outline his absurd vision. When he finished, I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a crisp white envelope on his desk. "What is this?" Richard asked, his smile faltering slightly. "My resignation," I replied, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "Effective in 2 weeks." Richard stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "You're joking," he stammered, tearing it open and scanning the single paragraph. "You can't leave now. Chloe isn't ready." "She's the regional operations director," I pointed out smoothly. "I'm sure her visionary leadership will guide the division to new heights." Richard's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "You're quitting because of the promotion? That's incredibly unprofessional, Harold. You're acting like a petulant child." "No, Richard. I'm acting like a professional who understands his market value. You decided my 5 years of perfect performance were worth less than your daughter's bloodline. I'm simply taking my expertise to a market that appreciates it." The anger in his eyes morphed into desperation, and then, predictably, into threats. "You think you can just walk away?" he snarled. "If you leave, I'll make sure you don't get a dime of your final commissions. I'll blacklist you in this industry." I leaned forward, resting my hands on his desk. "I wouldn't do that, Richard. Withholding my final paycheck and commissions would be a direct violation of California Labor Code Section 203. The waiting time penalties alone would cost Zenith a fortune, not to mention the legal fees when I sue you personally for retaliation." Richard blinked, momentarily stunned by the citation. He wasn't accustomed to subordinates fighting back with legal statutes. "Furthermore," I continued, "your decision to promote an unqualified family member while I was demonstrably the most qualified candidate constitutes a clear breach of fiduciary duty. If Zenith's board of directors were to audit this division and discover that you prioritize nepotism over profitability, you would be the one facing termination, not me." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had expected a cowering employee, terrified of losing his livelihood. Instead, he was facing a man who had meticulously calculated his exit. "I will work my final 2 weeks, ensuring a smooth transition of my immediate tasks," I said, standing up. "But I strongly suggest you spend that time teaching your daughter how to run this division, because I will not be doing it for her." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in organized chaos. Richard, realizing the gravity of the situation, attempted to micromanage my departure. He demanded exhaustive documentation of every client interaction, every logistical workaround, every vendor contact. I provided exactly what was required by my job description, nothing more, nothing less. Did not include the personal rapport I had built with Sarah Jenkins at Apex, nor the informal agreements I had with our freight forwarders that ensured priority shipping. That knowledge was mine. Chloe, meanwhile, was drowning. Without me to discreetly correct her errors, her incompetence became glaringly apparent. She alienated a key supplier by demanding unreasonable discounts, completely oblivious to the delicate balance of our vendor ecosystem. She promised delivery times to clients that were physically impossible to meet, forcing the logistics team into a state of perpetual panic. Richard tried to cover for her, spending hours in his office, attempting to untangle the messes she created, but the strain was visible. He looked haggard, his previous arrogance replaced by a frantic desperation. During this period, I quietly finalized my negotiations with a direct competitor, Vanguard Industrial Solutions. Daniel Thorne, their CEO, had been trying to recruit me for years. When he heard I was leaving Zenith, he moved swiftly, offering me a position as Vice President of Regional Operations, complete with a substantial salary increase, comprehensive benefits, and a signing bonus that entirely eliminated my financial anxieties. More importantly, Vanguard's corporate culture valued meritocracy over lineage. When my final day at Zenith arrived, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. I packed my belongings into a single cardboard box, the culmination of 5 years of dedication reduced to a few personal items. Richard refused to look at me as I handed in my security badge. "Good luck, Harold," he muttered, the words dripping with poorly concealed venom. "You'll need it." I smiled. "No, Richard, I won't, but I suggest you keep a close eye on Apex Manufacturing." The fallout was swift and devastating. Within a month of my departure, Sarah Jenkins contacted me at Vanguard. As I had predicted, Zenith's service quality had plummeted under Chloe's management. Deliveries were delayed, communication was abysmal, and Richard was desperately trying to patch the holes in a sinking ship. "Harold," Sarah said, over the phone, her voice tight with frustration. "Zenith just missed another critical shipment. Our production line is down. I need a reliable partner, and I know you can deliver." By the end of the week, Apex Manufacturing had transferred its entire account to Vanguard. It was a massive blow to Zenith, representing nearly 20% of their regional revenue, and Apex wasn't the only one. Over the next 3 months, 6 more of my former clients migrated to Vanguard, citing catastrophic failures in Zenith's operations and the arrogant incompetence of their new management. Richard, entirely predictable in his desperation, attempted to retaliate. He sent a cease and desist letter, accusing me of violating a non-disclosure agreement and stealing trade secrets. I forwarded the letter to Vanguard's legal team, who laughed it off. As I had noted before leaving, my client relationships were not trade secrets. They were the result of years of personal trust and professional excellence. Furthermore, California law strictly protected my right to engage in lawful business practices. Zenith had no legal leg to stand on, and their threats were exactly what I knew them to be. Void ab initio. The situation at Zenith rapidly deteriorated. The board of directors, alarmed by the sudden hemorrhage of major accounts and the catastrophic drop in revenue, initiated an internal audit. The investigation revealed exactly what I had warned Richard about: a blatant breach of fiduciary duty. They discovered that Richard had not only promoted his unqualified daughter, but he had also falsified performance metrics in an attempt to justify the decision. This act brushed dangerously close to forgery under California Penal Code Section 470, opening the company to severe legal liabilities. The board acted decisively. Richard Caldwell was terminated with cause, stripped of his severance package, and escorted from the building by security. Chloe, unable to function without her father's protection, resigned a week later, retreating into the obscurity from which she should never have been elevated. Zenith's regional division was left in ruins, a cautionary tale of the destructive power of nepotism and corporate hubris. As for me, I flourished at Vanguard. The influx of new clients solidified my position, and I was given the autonomy and resources to build the division according to my own vision. I was able to pay off my mortgage, ensure Lily's college tuition was fully funded, and, most importantly, regain the professional dignity that Richard had attempted to steal from me. A year later, I was attending an industry conference in Las Vegas. The convention center was a sea of familiar faces, the networking and deal-making humming with the usual intensity. As I was walking toward a seminar on advanced logistics, I spotted a familiar figure in the crowd. It was Richard Caldwell. He looked older, his posture stooped, the arrogant swagger completely vanished. He was wearing a slightly worn suit, handing out business cards for a small, struggling local distributor. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. I saw the flash of recognition, followed by a profound, agonizing humiliation. He knew exactly what he had lost, and he knew exactly why he had lost it. He had traded a loyal, high-performing executive for the illusion of familial power, and it had cost him everything. I didn't gloat. I didn't sneer. I simply offered a polite, professional nod and continued walking. The ultimate revenge wasn't in rubbing his face in his failure. It was in the undeniable reality of my success. I had taken control of my narrative, leveraging my expertise and my understanding of the law to protect my worth. I had refused to be a victim of a toxic corporate culture, and in doing so, I had built a life and a career that were unassailable. The lesson was clear, and it was one I would ensure Lily learned as she entered the professional world. Loyalty is a transaction, not an obligation. Your value is determined by your skills and your willingness to defend them, not by the whims of those who seek to exploit you. And when faced with a system rigged against you, the most powerful weapon you possess is the courage to walk away and build something better on your own terms. The integration into Vanguard Industrial Solutions was not without its initial friction. While Daniel Thorne had championed my arrival, there were inevitable territorial disputes and organizational adjustments that required diplomatic maneuvering. The existing regional directors, some of whom had been vying for the vice president position I now occupied, viewed me with a mixture of professional skepticism and thinly veiled resentment. I understood their perspective. I was the outsider, the mercenary brought in to accelerate growth. My strategy was not to assert dominance through decree, but to demonstrate value through immediate, undeniable results. The swift onboarding of Apex Manufacturing was the first undeniable proof of concept. But I didn't stop there. I initiated a comprehensive audit of Vanguard's existing logistical networks in the Southwest, identifying inefficiencies that had been overlooked for years. By renegotiating contracts with key freight forwarders, leveraging the increased volume brought by the former Zenith clients, I reduced regional transportation costs by 15% within my first quarter. This cost-saving initiative, coupled with the aggressive revenue growth, quickly silenced my internal critics. They began to see me not as a usurper, but as an asset that elevated the entire division. I instituted a culture of radical transparency, sharing the strategies that had secured the new accounts and actively mentoring the junior directors. I wanted to build a team that was as resilient and capable as I had been forced to become, a team immune to the kind of managerial incompetence I had fled. As Vanguard flourished, the contrast with Zenith became a subject of industry-wide discussion. The trade publications, which had initially covered Zenith's loss of major accounts as a generic restructuring issue, began to dig deeper. Investigative reporters, drawn by the dramatic shift in market share, started uncovering the details of Richard Caldwell's termination. The phrase breach of fiduciary duty began appearing in articles analyzing Zenith's decline. It served as a public warning to other corporations about the tangible, devastating costs of nepotism. I received numerous inquiries from journalists seeking comment, but I maintained a strict policy of professional silence regarding my former employer. I had no desire to engage in public mudslinging. The financial metrics spoke louder and more eloquently than any quote I could provide. My focus remained entirely on Vanguard and the future. I expanded our operations into emerging markets in Nevada and New Mexico, securing contracts with cutting-edge renewable energy firms that Zenith had completely ignored in their complacency. I was building a legacy, a testament to the power of merit and strategic foresight. Meanwhile, my personal life experienced a renaissance. The crushing anxiety that had characterized my final years at Zenith, the constant fear of arbitrary dismissal, the exhausting effort of compensating for incompetent leadership, evaporated. I found myself with more energy, more presence. Lily, now entering her sophomore year of college, noticed the change immediately. During a weekend visit, as we sat on the porch of my newly renovated home, she remarked on it. "You look different, Dad," she said, studying my face. "You look lighter, like you're not carrying a boulder on your shoulders anymore." I smiled, taking a sip of my coffee. "I'm not," I replied. I finally realized I was carrying someone else's boulder. I shared with her the details of my departure from Zenith, explaining the legal and strategic maneuvering that had secured my transition to Vanguard. I wanted her to understand the mechanics of professional self-defense. I explained the concept of void ab initio regarding unenforceable contracts, the critical importance of understanding a company's fiduciary duty, and the vital necessity of knowing your worth in the marketplace. Never let an employer convince you that your loyalty is a debt you owe them, I told her, my voice earnest. Loyalty is earned through mutual respect and fair compensation. If they breach that contract, you have every right and the obligation to yourself to walk away. Lily listened intently, absorbing the lesson. It was perhaps the most valuable education I could provide her, a practical guide to navigating the often treacherous waters of corporate America. Years passed, and the narrative of my departure from Zenith solidified into a foundational myth within Vanguard's corporate culture. It was used in leadership training seminars as a case study in ethical management and the importance of recognizing and retaining top talent. I was frequently asked to speak at industry conferences, sharing my insights on supply chain optimization and organizational resilience. I had become a respected authority in my field, a far cry from the marginalized, unappreciated manager I had been under Richard Caldwell. And yet, I never forgot the crucible that had forged my current success. The memory of that conference room, the smell of stale coffee, the smug entitlement on Chloe's face, and the desperate arrogance of Richard. It remained a vivid reminder of what I had escaped and what I must never allow to happen within my own organization. I had transformed a moment of profound professional humiliation into the catalyst for my greatest triumph. The story of Harold Vance was no longer a tragedy of corporate exploitation. It was a testament to the enduring power of competence, strategic thinking, and the unwavering courage to demand what one is truly worth. And in the end, that is the only metric that truly matters. To further ensure that Vanguard remained insulated from the structural failures that destroyed Zenith, I spearheaded the creation of an internal compliance board. This wasn't merely a rubber stamp committee. It was an independent body, reporting directly to the CEO, tasked with investigating any allegations of nepotism, unethical promotion practices, or hostile work environments. We wanted to create a system where Richard Caldwell could never take root. The board was empowered to review all executive appointments and possessed the authority to halt any promotion that lacked a clear merit-based justification. This initiative was initially met with some resistance from the old guard, who viewed it as an infringement on managerial autonomy. But I argued successfully that true autonomy requires accountability. Without it, autonomy rapidly devolves into tyranny. The implementation of the Compliance Board became a hallmark of Vanguard's commitment to ethical governance. Attracting top-tier talent who were disillusioned by the toxic politics prevalent in other firms, we became known not just for our logistical prowess, but for our unimpeachable corporate integrity. In the twilight of my career, as I prepared to transition into an advisory role and hand the reins of the regional division to a brilliant, fiercely competent successor, chosen entirely for her merit and track record, not her lineage, I look back on the journey with a profound sense of satisfaction. The conflict with Zenith was the defining battle of my professional life, a stark confrontation between entitlement and expertise. The victory wasn't merely financial, it was a vindication of my core values. I proved that in the long run, substance overcomes superficiality. The machinery of industry, the complex web of supply chains and client relationships cannot be sustained by arrogance and unearned privilege. It requires the quiet, relentless dedication of those who actually understand how the gears turn. I have built a career, a team, and a legacy upon that fundamental truth, and as I step away from the day-to-day operations, I do so knowing that the foundation I have laid is unshakable, built on the solid bedrock of merit, integrity, and the enduring power of professional excellence. The reflections on my journey continually reinforced a singular, unyielding truth about the nature of corporate America. The structures we build, the hierarchies we accept, are inherently fragile if they are not supported by genuine competence. The illusion of authority, such as the one Richard Caldwell attempted to project, is a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze of reality to collapse. I realized that my previous passivity, my willingness to endure indignity for the sake of a perceived stability, was a form of self-betrayal. I had allowed my fear of the unknown to bind me to a known toxicity. The true risk was never in leaving Zenith. The true risk was in staying, in allowing my skills to atrophy in an environment that actively devalued them. This epiphany is the cornerstone of my philosophy, a philosophy I impart to every young professional I mentor. I tell them to relentlessly audit their own careers. Are they being challenged? Are they being respected? Are they being compensated in accordance with the value they generate? If the answer to any of these questions is negative, they have a moral obligation to themselves to seek a better environment. Furthermore, The legal dimensions of my departure from Zenith serve as a potent reminder of the importance of informed self-advocacy. The corporate world often relies on the ignorance of its employees to enforce unenforceable policies. Richard's threat regarding my final paycheck, a clear violation of California Labor Code Section 203, was already predicated on the assumption that I would not know my rights. His attempt to enforce a non-compete, which was void ab initio under California Business and Professions Code Section 16600, was a bluff designed to intimidate. By arming myself with legal knowledge, I stripped him of his primary weapons. I transformed a potentially terrifying confrontation into a clinical dismantling of his authority. This is why I stress to my team at Vanguard that legal literacy is not just for lawyers. It is a fundamental survival skill for anyone navigating the modern professional landscape. Understanding the parameters of a breach of fiduciary duty, recognizing the hallmarks of illegal retaliation, knowing the specific protections afforded by state and federal labor laws. These are the tools that allow an employee to negotiate from a position of strength rather than a position of fear. The legacy of the Zenith debacle extends beyond my personal triumph. It is a case study in the catastrophic consequences of managerial hubris. When an organization prioritizes nepotism over merit, it doesn't just alienate its best employees. It introduces a systemic weakness that inevitably leads to failure. Chloe Caldwell, thrust into a position for which she was entirely unqualified, was not the villain of the story. She was a symptom of the disease. The true villain was the system that allowed her father to elevate her without consequence, a system that ignored the basic principles of fiduciary duty in favor of personal privilege. The collapse of Zenith's regional division was not an accident. It was the mathematically predictable result of replacing competence with entitlement. This is the ultimate lesson I carry with me, a lesson that informs every decision I make as a leader at Vanguard. We build our strength on the foundation of merit. We protect it with unwavering ethical standards, and we ensure that our success is driven by the collective expertise of our team, never by the arbitrary whims of an individual. This is the empire I have built, an empire born from the ashes of Zenith's failure, and it stands as an enduring testament to the power of professional integrity. The reflections on my journey continually reinforced a singular, unyielding truth about the nature of corporate America. The structures we build, the hierarchies we accept, are inherently fragile if they are not supported by genuine competence. The illusion of authority, such as the one Richard Caldwell attempted to project, is a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze of reality to collapse. I realized that my previous passivity, my willingness to endure indignity for the sake of a perceived stability, was a form of self-betrayal. I had allowed my fear of the unknown to bind me to a known toxicity. The true risk was never in leaving Zenith. The true risk was in staying, in allowing my skills to atrophy in an environment that actively devalued them. This epiphany is the cornerstone of my philosophy, a philosophy I impart to every young professional I mentor. I tell them to relentlessly audit their own careers. Are they being challenged? Are they being respected? Are they being compensated in accordance with the value they generate? If the answer to any of these questions is negative, they have a moral obligation to themselves to seek a better environment. Furthermore, the legal dimensions of my departure from Zenith serve as a potent reminder of the importance of informed self-advocacy. The corporate world often relies on the ignorance of its employees to enforce unenforceable policies. Richard's threat regarding my final paycheck, a clear violation of California Labor Code Section 203, was predicated on the assumption that I would not know my rights. His attempt to enforce a non-compete, which was void ab initio under California Business and Professions Code Section 16600, was a bluff designed to intimidate. By arming myself with legal knowledge, I stripped him of his primary weapons. I transformed a potentially terrifying confrontation into a clinical dismantling of his authority. This is why I stress to my team at Vanguard that legal literacy is not just for lawyers. It is a fundamental survival skill for anyone navigating the modern professional landscape. Understanding the parameters of a breach of fiduciary duty, recognizing the hallmarks of illegal retaliation, knowing the specific protections afforded by state and federal labor laws, These are the tools that allow an employee to negotiate from a position of strength rather than a position of fear. The legacy of the Zenith debacle extends beyond my personal triumph. It is a case study in the catastrophic consequences of managerial hubris. When an organization prioritizes nepotism over merit, it doesn't just alienate its best employees. It introduces a systemic weakness that inevitably leads to failure. Chloe Caldwell, thrust into a position for which she was entirely unqualified, was not the villain of the story. She was a symptom of the disease. The true villain was the system that allowed her father to elevate her without consequence, a system that ignored the basic principles of fiduciary duty in favor of personal privilege. The collapse of Zenith's regional division was not an accident. It was the mathematically predictable result of replacing competence with entitlement. This is the ultimate lesson I carry with me, a lesson that informs every decision I make as a leader at Vanguard. We build our strength on the foundation of merit, we protect it with unwavering ethical standards, and we ensure that our success is driven by the collective expertise of our team, never by the arbitrary whims of an individual. This is the empire I have built, an empire born from the ashes of Zenith's failure, and it stands as an enduring testament to the power of professional integrity.